Hello, you accursed undead. Welcome to the world ruled and ruined by man, one not dissimilar from the world in which we live. Welcome to the world of Drangleic. Today I will explore what soul I have left after the rage-inducing journey that has been Dark Souls 2. From my limited exposure to the game, my experiences playing it, and finally, the intentions of the developers as they were making it. Now I know the development story of Dark Souls 2 is filled with twists, turns, and numerous problems, but I will not be going into any depth about them. I will simply summarize by saying this: fitting to its title, this is a game of two souls, and you can really feel it. Now, I'm not gonna lie, I still don't have a concrete direction for where I want to go with the soul searching series. I'm just trying to figure it out as I go along, and it's been, oh god, over a month since I last recorded. The beauty of the channel being that I can take that kind of break. There was a lot of work stuff going on, and it doesn't affect the upload or work schedule of the channel, so you still get videos, hopefully 3 times a month, provided everything's going well, and I can take that time when I need to make sure I can make better quality videos. Anyway, with that being said, let us continue with soul searching for Dark Souls 2. Now, unlike Dark Souls 1, I didn't have a lot of exposure to this game. Like many of you, I saw the beautiful cinematic trailer they released with the Faram Knight falling to his knees in a desolate forest, arrows protruding from his back. I will say though, my cousin, the unnamed streamer, has a beautiful statue of the Faram Knight in his room, so I was vaguely aware of the game, knew that it was a sequel, naturally, to the game I had seen him playing, but I even less desire to play it, as it was a sequel to a game I had never really, gotten into, never really tried out for myself, and I didn't know at the time that the story was totally different, and it could be played entirely independently. Now, the first playthrough I'd ever done was in early May of 2017, which honestly feels like a lifetime ago. But funny enough, was the third game in the series that I had played, because as I mentioned in the last video, Chris, John, and myself had played them in an order of 3, 1, and then 2, as it was the most hated, and I can see why. When I first played the game, it was a nightmare of sluggish controls and a completely different feel from the others that somehow felt slower than the first game. The biggest thing that it taught me was a lot about tolerance, because John has such a love for the game, and I can't tell sometimes if it was nostalgia or something that I just didn't understand, but I partly played it because he held it in such high regard. Now, I will admit to complaining bitterly during the game, and even now, I would do the same. Now, I will admit to complaining bitterly during the game, and even now, I would still do the same. But a lesson my mom taught me that has been heavily reinforced by this game is sometimes you have to do things for other people because it makes them happy, even if it makes you unhappy. Now, I get it. That sounds like something you would tell a child, but hey, I was a child when she told me, and it's one of those bits of life advice that has always stuck with me. And it feels like she tailor-made it, pun intended, for this game. Not that, this game existed at the time, but still. The idea is there. Do things for those you love, even if it doesn't always make you happy, because making them happy should always be a priority. Now, I'm not saying do that to a detrimental degree that you start hating your life or giving up on things that you want, but understand that, something that's a minor inconvenience or a minor, problem for you might mean a lot more positively to them. And that it's okay for you to take those small little hits every once in a while if it really helps them up, if it really gives them a great experience. So that is honestly, I'm not gonna lie, one of the biggest reasons I decided to check out Dark Souls 2, because John loved it just so much, and I felt bad saying, no, I won't do this with you. I also realized after watching the original Souls series and this one, that in a bittersweet way, I feel kind of like a better person. I was an absolutely toxic asshat when I was listening back to the things I said, and genuinely I feel ashamed for a lot of the comments that I made. The fact that I can look back at that and say that is not the type of person that I want to be, or that I want to become again, does make me feel a little better about where I am now. That, of course, doesn't excuse what I said, but we all have to grow as people and own up to our mistakes, and the people we were before, in a healthy way that doesn't ruin our lives, or, get you canceled on Twitter and fired from your job and all that kind of stuff. People make mistakes, people grow from them, and I feel like this is something I'm going to harp on in the next video as well. I said a lot of stupid stuff, and I take full responsibility for saying it. I should never have said it. They were dumb jokes, they were edgy for the sake of being edgy, and I was an asshole to my friends. 2 people that I consider very dear friends, very close friends, and that I don't want to lose. So, Chris and John, I'm sorry. I'm going to say this again and again. I'm sorry for the way I acted in Dark Souls 1. I'm sorry for the way I acted in Dark Souls 2. I'm sorry for the way I acted in Dark Souls 3. I'm sorry for the way I've acted up until this point, because there have been moments that I know I've frustrated you, I've crossed that line, and you've done the same for me, but that's just, I get it. That's what friendships are, that's what growing as people means, but I wanted to be better than I was back then, and I hope for our sakes, for my sake, for everyone's sake, that I am, and that we can all become better. Anyway, I just wanted to throw that in there because I love you guys. And for that reason, I did want to say I'm very sorry for the way I treated you back then, and the fact that I let the game get under my skin, and it took that stress out on you too. It wasn't right, and I'm sorry. Speaking of the game getting under my skin, this was the only game that I can recall, at least in a Souls-like, that caused John to rage quit not once, but twice. Now, I want to reiterate that John claimed, often jokingly, that this was the best Souls game and has confirmed that he likes it better than some other mainline entries, which I will not get into. So for him to still hold it in such high regard was really strange to me, but looking back, it highlighted the difference between liking something and loving it. You can love something, or someone, and I am by no means equating John's feelings for the game to feelings for an actual person. I'll let him do that. But just because you love something doesn't mean it doesn't frustrate you, and it doesn't make you have to walk away sometimes. Dark Souls 2 absolutely does, but he still comes back to it time and time again, which, I mean, admittedly, he is a self-confessed, or at least self-confirmed masochist, but he genuinely loves this game. For all the pain, rage, and frustration that it has caused him, he enjoys this game. He has fun with it, he loves it deep down, and I can do nothing but respect that. Now, I will say I have never actually rage quit the game myself, because I've always felt like I was a constraint on the time schedule as is, so I could never bring myself to just constrain it even more. Chris has rage quit once, but that will be in a later series, so this game has claimed many victims, and rightfully so. I did learn, though, that it's okay to walk away without finishing absolutely everything, and this was a big problem for me back in the day. You know, like, I wasn't always the guy who wants to run the All Achievements podcast. I wasn't always the achievement hunter that I am with some games today, but I still wanted to do, like, every boss, see the whole story, do all the secret side stuff, you know? I had to do, if not absolutely everything, damn near everything. But I just was not willing to do that in this game. This game was like, listen, I am not for everyone. My 100% is not for everyone. And it taught me, not intentionally, but just by being as frustrating, as obtuse, as unwelcoming in some ways as it is, that it's okay to walk away. So that's what I did. That's what we had to do. And it really served as a good reminder right now, because I've been in a bit of a rut going for all achievements in various games with, admittedly, a spotty success rate, because I'm garbage at video games. When we walked away from this game without doing certain bosses because they weren't worth our time and frustration that we would suffer, it felt good, in the sense that it felt like I can just say, okay, I can't do this right now. This is not okay for me. This is not a situation I want to be in. It reminded me that sometimes you just have to walk away. Now, I know that's really deep for a video game, but I want to remind people, especially if they skipped the first episode, this is more a series of lessons I maybe didn't learn from Dark Souls, but I was reminded of through playing Dark Souls. Lessons that would be good for life in general, and that can be reinforced or remembered because of the experience you had in a video game. I did not learn this at the age of like 20, 21 or whatever, but it gave me a small starting point, because it can be hard to walk away from a toxic friendship, a toxic relationship, even a toxic workplace, because you feel like, and sometimes you're manipulated into feeling like you're not allowed to do that. Like, it's not okay. You have to, especially in my case, man up, quote unquote, and just deal with it. But you don't have to. If it is causing you pain, frustration, if it is not bettering your life, it's okay to walk away. And I get it, this is a video game, it's not that serious by any means. People play it for fun in their spare time. But the fact of the matter is, that little bit, this insignificant game, in the grand scheme of, you know, your entire life, could be a starting point for you to learn and put these lessons into practice. Walk away if you're getting frustrated. Walk away if you're not having fun. You don't have to come back. You don't have to do everything. You don't have to stick with this toxic or frustrating relationship out of some weird need for completion or need for closure. It's okay to walk away with something unfinished if it's really causing you that much pain. So anyway, I get that got really deep, and I'm sorry about that, but I'm kind of, again, crafting this series as I go along, and I think that's what I want this series to become, is a series where I talk about general life lessons that, again, I didn't learn with the series, but kind of were reinforced, were put into practice through the series, because I feel like that's a really good way to use video games in a positive discussion on more than just a, is this game good? Was this game fun? Does this game look pretty? Now, those are all really important discussions, but those aren't the ones I want to have with this particular series. Now, with that being said, let's get into the first ever, and arguably only ever, Dark Souls mod that I've played, known as Second Sin. Now, in early 2020, before the whole pandemic situation, we had finished with the only, as I said, only modded Dark Souls run I have ever done and likely will ever do. We played the Second Sin mod, which claimed to change a lot, and shortly after starting it, said that even larger changes were on the way, but it was almost a year of silence from the mod creator. So in short, this was basically another playthrough with very few significant changes, and maybe in a similar state now, but I've not looked into it. So during this mod, I immediately pulled away from the established family idea. I kind of let that one off to the side because I completely forgot about it, to be honest. And I decided I was going to use a magic, enchantment, and one-handed weapons. So John said, oh, I would be like Gandalf from Lord of the Rings. And thus, Glandrelf was born. The idea being that I wanted to try something slightly different, but not too different, because I saw the power that magic has in this game. I also lost my tolerance for meme builds after experiencing them from the guys and from creating my own. They just weren't worth the time and frustration, especially when the game is this difficult already. So, I'll talk more about meme builds, especially in Dark Souls 3, but yeah, that definitely killed the idea of wanting to experiment with something that may have been fun or like a dumb idea, if it didn't have actual, like, positive ramifications for the game, if it wasn't a viable build from a, you know, completing the game efficiently standpoint, and yeah, I just could not bring myself to play an inefficient build anymore. I learned that this game was the most constraining, but not in the way that it inspires creativity. You know, it's not like people under pressure come up with really creative alternative solutions. It's just, no, you can't do that, or you can do that, but it's going to be 1,000 times more difficult or frustrating than if you just did it the way that might be the overpowered, might be the common, or might be just the expected or intended way to do it. I'm not going to lie, I don't have a lot to say about this series because it was generally a fairly mundane experience where we controlled ourselves so we didn't have to care too much. I definitely got more practice dealing with the rather intoxicated side of Chris at times, which thankfully I've not done for a while. It can be funny, but at the same time, Chris is already kind of unhinged in a way, and I mean, so can I, or I can also be pretty unhinged, but like, drunk Chris is a whole nother beast. So that's a little lesson for you guys. If you've never experienced your friends really drunk before, they sometimes become different people. Realistically, the Second Sin mod didn't change anything the way that I was expecting to, based on how it was sold to me and presumably to John. At the time that we had played, the creator had been silent for around 8 months, and then a few sessions in, and apparently made an update post saying, hey, you know, I'm coming back, I'm going to make all these really big changes, I don't remember what the details were, and I never found out, I never went back to look if those changes were actually implemented. So this run was just, again, very mundane, very typical. There were no significant changes outside of a few enemy placements, or like 1 or 2 boss changes that I can even remember after watching the series. So there was nothing that I felt really impacted me here, or really kind of, you know, serves as a good learning experience, or serves as a good example of different things. Now, 2 years later, or at least almost 2 years later, in early November of 2021, we began a run that would kind of put a cap on the game for many of us. We did a run where we fought and defeated every boss in the game. Now, this was quite the feat, as before I had never done so, and neither had Chris. John did have some experience with them, so we were relying on him rather heavily during this time. I learned something rather important. I learned how to be more self-reliant, because this game, unlike many others, leaves you on your own for many of the boss fights, which proved to be the most difficult. So I had no choice but to become better. In a sense, this was refreshing because not only having another member of the family in the form of Jin from accounting, it felt like the first playthrough we took seriously, because we had to, and that made the experience a lot more fun. It felt like me experiencing the game for the first time, and honestly softened my impressions and made the whole experience a bit better and a bit easier. This was also an opportunity for me to get more intimate with the game. I'll let you read into that how you want to look at all the areas of it that I've been neglecting, all the ideas, all the bosses, everything that I didn't want to deal with when we were doing our original series. There were so many things I willingly missed out on, and yet still judged the game as a whole, which is not fair to Dark Souls 2. So I'm sorry, Dark Souls 2. And I'm sorry From Software and the team who made Dark Souls 2. In some ways, it's absolutely as bad as I thought, and in many ways, it isn't. A lot of the bosses immediately made it clear why we avoided them. Only a handful of them came with a sense of pride after beating them. One of the most situational lessons I learned is to avoid energy drinks because I don't consume a lot of caffeine. Like, I don't drink coffee, and at the time was dramatically reducing my soda intake in an attempt to get healthier, so the caffeine hit me real hard. I became very chaotic and irritable, which was not anticipated, and also wasn't helped by the fact that the whole reason I was consuming it was because I was very sleep deprived. So you take a sleep deprived individual, dose them up on caffeine, which is not new to their body, but their body isn't very familiar with, and it's just a recipe for disaster. So I have not touched one since, and it has been over 2 years at this point, so hopefully never again. Now, I understand I've been avoiding the DLC, and that was because we often didn't do it at all until this playthrough. So here's where I'm going to start talking about it. They all had a series of ups and downs, which really encapsulates the feeling that I had gotten from the base game, a roller coaster of highs and lows, which were all capped off by a boss fight. The Sunken Crown DLC was one of my favorites because it had the Sin fight, which isn't terrible, and doesn't have much working against it like the others do. It's a very middle of the road, and almost what I was actually looking for. Not this, like really high, then really low, just kind of a mid-level experience that was still fun, but it didn't have too many things to take away from that fun. I will say my favorite one, though, was the fire one. I can't remember what crown that was, because it had both the Fume Knight and Sur Alon. These were absolutely two of the most fulfilling and rewarding fights to finish. Being able to see them to the end felt amazing, and though I did have some complaints around the level design, but it was by no means the worst. Hell, the first time we tried to fight Sur Alon, and kind of the fight that we gave up on in our first series, we only saw the floor and his feet, because when they died on the first strike after entering the room, and I say they because Chris and John made it, I died on the way, the camera panned down to the floor. So it was a hell of an experience to be able to finally go back and beat this guy. Now, the title of the worst DLC for Dark Souls 2 is held by the Frozen Crown. And I would more than love to let it go, but I can't. I had not only terrible mechanics in the fog, terrible areas in Pony Plowtown, and terrible bosses in the form of the cats, who you fight multiple times. The boss fight with the King and the Lois Knight was awesome, but nowhere near enough to redeem the whole DLC. Plus, finding the knights for your side is such a pain. It's not worth it in some sense, because you can do the King fight, and that's the last thing you have to do. That's great, that's cinematic, that's awesome. It's all the side stuff, like the cats, Pony Plowtown, and all that just really bring it down. But this time I learned that, you know what? I put it down before, I was in a better headspace now, and I was going to finish it. I was going to push through and see everything the game had to offer. Which is another important lesson, just because you're not in the right headspace for something at the time, doesn't mean you can't come back to it. Just because you close one door, doesn't mean you can't open it again. I mean, there is the possibility where you can. There's also the possibility where people give you resistance to opening that door. But if you're willing to try hard, put in the dedication, the time, the effort, you can always, at least almost always, reopen that door to finish what you started. Speaking of opening that door, let's quickly bust through some of the other main game bosses that I haven't talked about. The rats are just actual trash and really bring down the feeling of the game a whole lot. Whoever thought the rats were a good idea is an absolute sadist and they hate everyone, and I want to shake your hand because what the hell? Then it's really brought up again by the Dark Lurker fight, which was a very tense and nail-biting experience. I will admit the forced PvP dungeons, I get they were NPCs, but still, before, are really frustrating as someone who does not enjoy PvP at the best of times, let alone in Dark Souls 2. The other reason I haven't mentioned these bosses before, or kind of this stuff, is because they highlight something that I have complained about, but not engaged with much before this run. Would you believe? My biggest issue with these bosses, especially the solo ones, are that they rail against the idea of community that the first game was developing and the Dark Souls 2 itself pushes. Solaire's entire thing was jolly cooperation, working together with other people, including summoning NPC helpers. So to turn around and say, hey, fight this thing on your own, felt very out of place. Like it wants so badly to be different that it falls into the classic situation that Dr. Malcolm called out way back in the 90s. I will say that this run did give me much more of an appreciation for the game as a whole, because I saw a lot more of what it had to offer. I'm not gonna lie, it is not something I would recommend doing more than once, because it can be really, really exhausting. I did it a second time. Now, as you'll remember back in 2021, From Software was hacked, and as a result, they took down all the servers for almost a year. This just so happened to be at the same time that John and I were doing our All Achievements run in the Souls series. So we had a bit of time to sit and wait, which we did for damn near a year. Now, for full disclosure, I have fully covered this journey on the podcast, so I'll keep it brief. Links are in the description down below if you want to check that out, and get a little more detail about what I'm about to say. I do want to mention, though, that when we undertook these journeys, we cleared all of our achievements beforehand and got them all fresh, meaning that we did not fight all bosses. We did have to redo difficult ones if they had an achievement tied to them, much like Dark Lurker. I learned to appreciate the game even more, but now for a very different reason. The NPC questlines here were much more engaged and felt much more involved. I love to actually experience their stories on a deeper level than use just Avati Vidya as a background noise and singing his praises to the heavens. Now don't get me wrong, he does incredible work. There are numerous YouTubers who do fantastic work around the lore, whether it be Vati, or Mantis, or Zuli, but sometimes it just, it hits different, so to speak, when you actually do them in game, as opposed to a video you're half listening to. Majula started to feel like a community as people came in to act as shops, covenants, provide other services like the ladder guy, I can't remember his name, but shout out to you. It further opened my eyes to what I'd been intentionally ignoring large portions of. It's what made this game unique in the series. This is the other reason, though, that I am so against their solo boss fights, because this is the game that focuses the most on building a community in your world. You recruit all of these people to help you. You gather NPCs to fight bosses, and help fulfill their lives, or undeath's, goal. And help fulfill their life's, or sometimes their undeath's, goal. But of course you need to fight some of the hardest bosses on your own. Don't give me the whole spiel about the power of friendship, and then make me fight without my friends. Now, as I record this in January of 2024, man, that's crazy. That's crazy. Anyway, we're actually doing a run right now, just in vanilla Dark Souls 2. So one thing I forgot to mention at the beginning is every single one of these runs, up until this point, were done in the Scholar of the First Sin edition. So that changed around enemy placement, it changed around smaller mechanics, and brought it closer to their quote original vision of the game with the new director. Now I'll get to that in just a minute, but I want to stress that this run we are currently doing is on the base game version, vanilla Dark Souls 2, not Scholar of the First Sin. Yes, I have both editions. So we've done a few sessions at this point, not very many, haven't gotten very far. I won't spoil anything. But at the time of recording, I'm starting to enjoy the game a lot more. Partly because certain things have been, unnerfed, if that's even a word, so they've been made stronger, even though they were, because they were made weaker in the Scholar edition. The enemy placement is much more forgiving, and a lot more logical in my opinion, which makes for an overall better experience. I'm seeing more and more with each playthrough why John enjoys this game, and my opinion of it has risen drastically, though I still prefer the other numbered entries in the series. I can't speak on the whole about the experience because obviously I've not finished the base game yet, but I will say, I never expected to have played it for a 5th time, and finding myself enjoying it more, but hey, here we are. Now, I have spoken at length about my own experience and understanding of the game, and what I learned. So now it's time to look at the directors. Yes, I said directors, much like the number of the title, this game had 2 different directors. Now, I won't get into the nitty-gritty details, but the first director, Tomohiro Shibuya, and hopefully I did not butcher that entirely, I may have, was taken off the project halfway through and replaced by Yue Tanimura. Again, I really apologize if my pronunciation is horrible. It's just, I don't have good Japanese. So Tanemura, as I will be referring to, finished the game and then crafted the DLC, as well as the Scholar of the First Sin edition later. Now, through reading, design documents, through watching interviews, through kind of trying to absorb as much information as I could, neither director was able to truly demonstrate their full creativity or capabilities, and it feels like a soul made up of two separate halves that are both incomplete and incompatible with one another. The intentions of the first director were clearly to pull away from the original Souls game and create an experience all on its own. For example, Lucatiel was meant to be a Don Quixote reference, with the little bell people serving as a version of Sancho. So clearly a very different version than what we got. The second director, however, was not able to remove many of these things, and so had to retool them for a different purpose. Which he did, and still shipped the game on time, which is a massive feat that cannot be understated, the amount of time, pressure, and crunch that presumably went on to get it out on schedule in spite of these changes. So genuinely, massive respect to them for not only being able to finish the product, but get it shipped on time. Even though I may or may not have hated the experience from the beginning. What I mean by it feels like it's created with two halves. The first director clearly had a vision, clearly had everything they wanted to, and they were starting to lay out that groundwork. And once they got all the pieces in place, they just wanted to put them in certain areas, kind of finish off the game with where he wanted his pieces on the board. But then he got taken off the project. When the second director was brought in, he was told, you have to finish it in this time. He couldn't change what pieces were on the board. He just had to move them around, maybe paint them to look a little differently, and give them an entirely new purpose. So we never got to see either director's full creative vision come to fruition, and we see one, who set up the board, the other who placed on the board. But not the board that they wanted. I'm so curious to see what a Dark Souls 2 would have looked like under either director all the way through. Heck, give me two versions of the game, one with each director all the way through. And just to see how different they are, to see what their ideas would have become. But the reality is we didn't get that. We got what I would argue is the most egregious compromise that they could have come up with that I think hurt all parties at the end of the day. I believe it hurt sales, even though it sold pretty well, to be honest. I believe it hurt the directors, first and second, general prospects, because they had to put their names on a game that wasn't fully theirs. They had to share that with someone else, which I'm all for sharing, but when it's your creative vision, when it's your creative product and the thing you've put your blood, sweat, tears, and soul into, to have that taken away, and then just even to have, that given to you as someone else who puts their blood, sweat, tears, and soul into something, and then, it gets ripped away from someone else and handed to you, and they're like, hey, finish this. And you don't know what to do at that point. There's no right answer there. So I honestly don't know too much of what their proper goals were, but here's a little bit of what I gathered from especially the second director, as he was kind of the one to put together the story and obviously put on the finishing touches. He stated, though, that he wanted the idea of trying to heal a curse, which was much bigger than that of being an undead. You need to cure the curse that the land has suffered. When I read that subtitle in an interview, linked down below, I understood his intentions. I understood why there was such an emphasis on the ideas of community and growing Majula. Because you were meant to heal even this small part of the world while you track down the decaying monarchy that has added to its corruption. I believe that the original director tried too hard to be different to the point where that became their focus rather than making a good game that can stand on its own. They wanted something bigger, better, and more advanced. I think this should have been a case of less is more. Dark Souls 2 has 43 bosses, which is significantly more than either of the other numbered entries. And yes, it pales in comparison to Elden Ring's 165 bosses. However, Elden Ring is a much bigger game by a much larger team that's meant to be an open world experience, not this branching linear pathway experience. And I would argue that even Elden Ring suffers the same problem as Dark Souls 2, where the bosses aren't of equal quality because there's so many of them. Anyway, getting a little off track. Let's come back to it. The world is dying from the curse, and you're meant to fight it and heal it, or try your best. This was a world abandoned by the gods. You're meant to play a sort of hero figure to heal the world and bring back people's hope. That's what Majula is meant to do. That's why at the end of this game, you don't have the option to just light the bonfire or let it die. You either have to take up the position that the monarchy had to lead the people, to heal the world, or walk away. Destroy the corruption and let the chips fall where they may. Let the world decide where it should go next. This is not the same, Age of Man versus Age of Dark discussion we're having. This is, do you, as the hero, as the healer, take control and decide where the world should go, or do you let it decide on its own? What level of freedom and autonomy do humans deserve, and does the Earth deserve, in trying to repair the damage that has been done to it? Now, I get that's a really philosophical question that might not be what they're going for with the series, but that's kind of what I took out of it. So let me wrap this whole thing up. I've been rambling for way too long. In conclusion, I learned to love something. I learned how much opinions can change over the years with different experiences and perspective on life. And I learned to love honestly, to recognize the faults in something and not look past them. Not say, oh, that doesn't exist, they weren't actually doing that, or it wasn't really that bad. I can say, yeah, it was that bad, but I can also start to say, I love the game despite those flaws, despite the things that I don't love about it. And I would love to see this team, these directors, get a shot at a spin-off for Dark Souls, to see where their creative visions could go. With all that being said, thank you, ladies, gentlemen, everyone in between and beyond, for sticking it out with me. I understand this is a bit of a weird video, a bit of a longer one. If you made it to the end, thank you so much. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, all the YouTube stuff. Welcome to 2024. I get this is going out in early February, and I'm way behind the curve. But this is kind of the nature of when I record videos a month, 2 months in advance. I don't really think about, when this is going out, to say stuff that's relevant at the time. Anyway, enough of my really tired ramblings. Thank you again so much for watching, for being here, for listening. And, yeah, I'll see you in the next one. Have a good one. Bye.